Although that was a pretty simple and basic scale pattern, it was executed in such a way so that I practiced the maximum number of string crossings that are possible in that pattern. Hello and welcome to another episode of Quick Tips. This episode is all about maximizing string crossing practice for any scale pattern that you're practicing. And how we're going to do that is to apply the very basic concept of simply keeping track of which finger we start and end on when we play a scale pattern. So there's kind of 3 points of focus here that I want to go over before we get into applying this exercise. So the first is, when we're practicing scales, we want to work whatever mechanism it is that we're using. If we're using 2 fingers, I and M, maybe 3 fingers, A and AMI, maybe AI, whatever the case may be, we want to train that mechanism so that it works on its own. So that if we want to do an IM pattern, it's always IM, it's always alternating, and we're never doubling a finger without realizing it. Okay? The second point is that one of the most difficult things, especially for me in scale playing and guitar playing with fingerstyle, is string crossings. When you go from one string to the next string. So we want to practice our string crossings, and not only that, we want to practice all the different manners of string crossings that we could possibly come across. And the third point is that we're going to work on the first 2 points by simply applying this rule of keeping track of which plucking hand finger you start and end on. And by lining that up in a logical, progressing way, we can practice all manners of string crossings in whatever scale passage that we're playing. So to explain this, let's say that we're going to work on an IM scale mechanism, okay? And let's take a simple A major box position 2 octave scale, okay? It's going to sound like this. Okay, so if we're going to play this scale, there's pretty much an unlimited amount of ways that you can play it. You can just play it straight up and down. You can double the root at the top, kind of your arrival point. Okay, you can double the root in the middle too. Okay, you can add a tail at the top. Okay, you can practice it any way that you want and still practice all the string crossing possibilities if you just keep track of which finger you start and end on and line that up accordingly. So let's say I'm going to start on I, and I'm going to choose to play it this way, just straight up and down, just for now. Okay, and simply figure out, if you start on I, which finger do you end on? So I just play it kind of slowly and I just count. I am, 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 I. Okay? And I go nice and slow and I make sure that it's always alternating. And now I know if I start on I will end on I. So when I play that pattern, even if I'm going for speed or trying to try something new, I know if I start on I should end on I. So if I do that, probably all my alternating was good. If I start on I but I end on M, in this instance, probably I didn't alternate correctly somewhere. So it's a quick check for, is your scale mechanism working the way that it should be? So if I just practice this over and over, starting and ending on I, I'm always practicing the same types of string crossings. I, okay, and etc. So to practice the opposite, or the inverted string crossings, if you will, I'll need to start the pattern on M. And because this is a 2-finger pattern, if we play it once, starting on I, and then ending on I, play it again, starting on M and ending on M, that will give us all the possible string crossings using this scale mechanism, IM, and this particular scale pattern. So if I start on M, and I end on M, which is what happened, then I know I've practiced all of the other string crossing possibilities. So once you've got that straight, you can just move the scale around as much as you want to, move it all over the fingerboard. That would be good practice. And if you're always alternating, every time you move it, you'll be practicing the next iteration of string crossing. So if I start on I, the next one is M, and then I, and then M. So if you line it up that way, you're practicing all the possible string crossings, and you're making this mechanism very strong because you're just teaching it no matter what comes next. It's always the appropriate next thing. And you're never worried about doubling a finger. That just doesn't happen because it's always alternating. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how we're applying this concept of keeping track of which finger we start and end on, and using that to practice the maximum number of string crossings in a given passage. Now let's pretend that you don't prefer the way that scale sounds, and you say, well, I like to practice it instead like this. Okay, I like the way it sounds like that. So all we need to do now is figure out the finger that we start and end on. If we start on I, what finger do we end on? So let's see. If I start on I. Okay, if I start on I end on M. That means every time we restart this pattern, we're going to have the same fingering sequence. We're going to have the same types of string crossings. So if you like to practice your scales that way, it's no big deal. I might just arrange it so that instead of switching patterns back to back like we did before, you do a big chunk of one way and then practice it backwards, if you will. Do a big chunk of the other way. So if you like the way this scale sounds and you want to move it around like we did before, maybe you want to move it differently. Let's move it in whole steps this time, because you can certainly do that as well. So you might practice it like this, starting on I and always ending on M, knowing that you're going to do the same sequence of string crossings each time. Okay, so you could practice that, whatever your number of repetitions is, and then when you're done, just do it backwards. So do the same phrasing, just start on M, and this time you're going to work the inverse pattern of string crossings just as much as you did the other way. So this time we're going to start on M, and then M, and then M. Okay, and then do that as many times as you want for your progression. Then you've practiced all possible string crossings. You've just done a big chunk first and then a big chunk next instead of doing it back to back like we did the first time. So now that we've gone through a couple of examples for how to utilize this, I want to take it a step further and look at a more advanced approach. This is going to involve 3 fingers instead of 2, and we're going to go back to this exercise that I played at the beginning of the video and break that down, okay? So in this exercise, I'm using a 3-finger pattern. It's AMI continuous, okay? So since we have 3 fingers in the pattern instead of 2, 2 repetitions of the pattern will not give us the maximum amount of string crossings. We need 3. We need to start on each of the 3 fingers one time to get all the possible string crossings. So now I'm going to play this chromatic pattern. I'm going to use AMI continuously, and I'm going to check and see if I start on A, which finger do I end on? So let's find out. AMI, 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 AMI. Okay, so if I start on A, I end on I, okay? And that should mean if I start on I end on M. And that should mean if I start on M, then I'll end on A, and now I'm back where I started. So now I know if I just play this pattern up and down without doubling any notes, that I will get 3 patterns in a row that will give me the maximum number of string crossings available in this pattern using AMI. If it wasn't that way, if I started on A and I ended on A, all I'd need to do was just double a note somewhere. I could double it at the beginning, I could double it at the end, doesn't really matter. You could throw in a slur too, that will advance the fingering pattern forward. so that you start on A and you end on another finger, or you start on A and end on A and then, start the next pattern on the next finger, so that you're working all the possible patterns for all the possible string crossings. Okay, so let's run through it real quick, make sure we get all possible string crossings. So I'm going to start on A, I, M, okay, and then it ended on A. Forgot to say that. So that gave me all the possible string crossings. Now I love patterns that work like that, where you can just play them over and over and you start on a different finger and you're getting so much work out of your scale practice because it's a different scale each time, different string crossing patterns. It's very well rounded for your plucking hand. But you can apply this concept and shape it to fit your needs no matter what pattern you're playing. So for a last example, let's pretend that you wanted to do this same AMI pattern, you want to do the chromatic scale, but you need to take your chromatic scale all the way up to this E on the first string, 12th fret. Okay, no big deal. So I'm just going to start the pattern on A and see what finger I end up on. Okay, end on A. Okay, so what do I need to do? All I need to do is double a note somewhere. I'm going to put it at the end. So at the end, I'm going to end on A. Then the next pattern is going to begin on M, and then I'm going to start it there. So you're just going to hear two E's at the end, and that will start the next pattern on M. Do that again, that will start the next pattern on I. And then I'll have practiced all the different string crossing possibilities. So A, and then A if you want to keep going, right? So simply by just knowing what finger you start and end on in your plucking hand, you can use any scale pattern with any particular plucking hand combination and get so much more benefit and well-rounded practice out of your scale playing. Now, if you need more string crossing exercises, this is something I certainly had to practice a lot, then head on over and join the A Guitar community. There, you'll find another quick tips video where we look at 5 more exercises in order to practice string crossings. So thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful day.